advocated the importance of reaching out to our state's Hispanic community because Kansas Democrats and Kansas Latinos share the same values. We all want a Kansas where no one gets left behind, where there are better jobs and opportunities for hardworking families, and where our children can attend strong, safe schools. At this critical juncture in our state's history, it is even more important that we reach out to our Latino neighbors and join with them to protect our future as we work together to elect candidates who will fight for what's right. The Kansas Democratic Party has made this partnership a priority, and we have taken a great step by hiring Carlos Lugo. Carlos, where are you? Our new Hispanic Outreach Director. We look forward to working with Carlos and our Hispanic caucus throughout the coming months to help spread our message of education, opportunity, and responsibility. We are also very, very fortunate tonight. We have a great inspiration for our endeavor. Our keynote speaker is Juan Sepulveda. Juan was born and raised in Oakland, a working-class Mexican-American neighborhood in Topeka. It was in Topeka that Juan started his career in politics, when at the age of 16, he became the first high school student hired to work for the Kansas Secretary of State, the first in his family to attend college. Mr. Sepulveda earned degrees from Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford Law. A leader in Latino outreach and advocacy, Juan has worked with numerous national organizations, such as the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project and the Common Enterprise. He also served as Executive Director for the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics, and is currently helping our party engage Latinos at the national level as the DNC's Senior Advisor for the Hispanic Affairs, where he led the DNC portion of the Latino Obama 2012 team that helped re-elect President Obama with a record level of Hispanic support. Please join me in welcoming Kansas native son, Juan Sepulveda.
Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the introduction. It's great to be home. And I also want to let you know that my wife, Teresa Niño, is also works for Governor Sebelius now. So she's in charge of Governor Sebelius. And so the other thing is, people talk about when they hear my name, Juan Sepulveda, they usually don't think of Topeka, Kansas. But I tell them it was great to grow up here. I love coming home. But one of the most important things about being a Kansan is it allowed me to get married. So when I first met the woman who would become my wife, and we first met, we really hit it off, we had a great time. But for some reason at that point, one of her girlfriends told me later that she came up to her and said, "Hey, so you met Juan, what did you think?" He said, "Yeah, he's a good guy, he seems all right, and and she said, "Well, what do you think about him?" "Yeah, well, I'm not sure, but, he's a Texan." And so they tell me, and then they said, no, he's not a Texan. He's actually from Topeka, Kansas. And my wife, Teresa, who was born in Mexico, but moved to the United States when she was 5 and grew up in Chicago, said, "Oh, he's from the Midwest?" And I got married. So I got I want to say thanks to Jason, to Dakota, to Jones, everybody from the entire team. Carlos, welcome to the team. But it was great to be able to get the invitation. What I've been asked to do tonight is they asked me to talk about what we've learned both in Texas for the campaign in 2008 for then Senator Obama, and the most recent re-election campaign worked on the Latino side for the DNC. In between, I was a political appointee running the White House office on education in the Hispanic community, where we were actually using a lot of what worked well in the campaign in the way we think we should govern as well. And so they asked me tonight to come here to talk about what I've learned, what we've learned from those different campaigns, and in particular to see what we can bring back here home, to see what we can do to really kind of change things so that we can be up here next time talking about Governor Davis. And we are going to find the 9 voters back in my neighborhood who didn't vote for my state. And so, when we talk about this on the Obama campaign, both in 08 and 12, and continuing to do this, one of the first things we do when we have these conversations, and I do really want this to be a conversation, so if there's any point you've got a question, jump in. I'm hoping when I'm finished that if you've got, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If there's anything you need me to clarify or anything that you want me to, any kind of comments, I'd love to be able to have a conversation. The last thing you want is another just kind of lecture tonight. But let me go ahead and tell you about some of the things we do when we even talk about some of these issues. One of the first things we think is really important to do is we put onto the table, the president really has pushed us to do this, he's a really smart guy, and there's a couple things we do in our meetings before we get started around some of these key issues. One is we put onto the table what we call undiscussables. I was in the Hispanic caucus meeting for a little bit today. We talked about some of those. For us, we say to have these conversations, we have to put on the table undiscussables. Things that we know everybody in the room knows, but for some reason we can't get them to say it publicly. It doesn't get out there. People kind of go in corners and say, yeah, you know, this is how it really is, or here's what's really kind of happening. But for some reason you can't get it elevated to saying, let's hear it out loud so that we can deal with it. So that's one set of things we do in our meetings. What are the undiscussables? And then the second piece that the president pushes us to do is to say, what are some of the key assumptions? What's your thinking behind some of the stuff you're jumping into? So I wanted to start there because some of those undiscussables and some of those assumptions were important to us as we were trying to figure out how best to work with the Hispanic community. So a couple of undiscussables. Undiscussable number one, the Democratic Party and both political parties in the United States don't matter. They're in decline. That if we really look at their history over time, they have become less and less important in elections. It's all about candidates now. And the parties have lost a lot of their strength. That's one of the things that we're trying to turn around, but a lot of times it's a hard thing to put out on the table, that it's changed historically, and that the question is how do we restore the parties to really playing a stronger role. But let's be honest, the parties have lost influence over time. That's one assumption, one undiscussable that we put onto the table. The second one was, as we talked to folks around the country, what we found was that a lot of the work, in particular for our party, that was taking place didn't matter, had unintended consequences that really hurt the party, or a lot of times what we heard from folks, but it was just flat out boring stuff. Right? Of all the things I could be doing, my wife and I have got a couple kids who just finished through college, but it's like spending time with our kids. It could be maybe go play a little basketball today, whatever it is. You're up against these things. What is it that draws you to kind of get involved into the Democratic Party? And what we heard from a lot of folks was that elections, that people battling it out of who's going to get to an at-large spot, what's going to happen on the committees, what the things we do on the committee structures, and even how our meetings and conventions are run were really not working. And so let's be honest about it, put it on the table and figure out how do we deal with that as well. Those were two of the undiscussables we talked about. And then there were a couple of assumptions. One assumption was, for us as a presidential level, even at a state level, but for us we were talking about a presidential campaign, you cannot run a state field program. You cannot run a presidential field program because the places are too big. It costs too much money. It takes too much time. That was one of the assumptions. A second assumption was Hispanics aren't political. They don't get involved. They don't vote. They're not registered. So don't even waste your time. Don't waste your resources, your energy, because they're just not interested in politics. You see the turnout rates. That's a starting point. But then we also had another assumption, which was that when it comes to messaging, right, we were coming into an 07 and an 08 campaign, which still said that you had to control the messages, right? That things came out of the campaign, we had to listen to Dakota, we got to get our talking points, we got to make sure we're all saying the right stuff, and anything that was happening outside of that was, remember this, the unauthorized, not authorized by the candidate. It was crazy stuff that was out there, and we had to make sure we were controlling and being really clear about the small number of people who were on board about delivering messages. So those were some of the things that we put on the table when we were thinking about what we wanted to do to try to increase the Hispanic vote in some key battleground states, both in 08 and in 12. So what I want to talk about now are some of the things we've learned, and see, hopefully, that they're the kinds of things we can bring home here to Kansas. The first one, which was really critical, and it wasn't just for us on the Hispanic side, but for as a campaign as a whole, was our organizational values and culture. If you went into any one of our offices in 07 and 08, and again in 12, you would see 3 words somewhere in that office: respect, empower, and include. And I've been involved in a lot of campaigns. I know a lot of you have as well. I've never been involved in a campaign that really carried out that way of doing business. And so that became very important to us as we were trying to get the Hispanic community involved. On the respect side, it was pretty straightforward, treating folks as equals, making sure that we were kind of flattening the organization, getting rid of a lot of titles, and just allowing people to step up and to do their work. And I think about it for us on the Hispanic side, as we talk to folks, so many of us, not just in the party, but in our lives, had had a lot of situations where folks were not respecting us, who were not helping us, who were, even sometimes with the best of intentions, were kind of disrespecting us along the way. And so I remember in one of these conversations we were talking about it, and we were just kind of sharing our stories, and I was talking about something I went through when I was in high school, right? I grew up in Topeka, Kansas. And I was very fortunate to be the first one in my family to go to high school, to go to college, and this was in 1981 when I was graduating from high school and going to college. I didn't know anything about going to college. My mom said I was going to go to college. She didn't know anything about it. She didn't go to college. And so we didn't know what we were getting into. I was doing well in school, and I was near the top of my class. I was a decent basketball player, 5'9" Mexican point guard. Just what every college is looking for. Involved in politics, involved in my church, in the community, doing a lot of stuff. And you all know this in your senior year when you've got to go see the high school counselor, right? And so it was to my turn to go see the high school counselor. And I don't want to mention his name, Mr. Rohr. And I went in to go see him, and it was time to talk about what he would do next. And I knew nothing about colleges, and this is before we had the computers in our house. And so before you know anything about merge, mail, letters, or anything like that, so my sophisticated strategy was to count the number of envelopes that I got from schools, and whoever sent me the most number of envelopes, I was convinced, thanks for that, it is hilarious, that I was convinced that they really wanted me the most, because when I opened these letters, they said, "Dear Juan." They put my name in there. I mean, they really wanted me. So I go to see Mr. Rohr, and I put my envelopes down on the table, and I tell him, he says, "So what do you think about it?" I said, "I think I'm going to go to college." And he said, "Where are you thinking of going?" I said, "I think I'm going to apply to 3 schools. I'm going to apply to Harvard, to Yale, and this school called Brown." And I put the envelopes in front of him. And he said, "Juan, you're a great kid. You're one of the smartest kids here at school. You're a fast runner. You're a good basketball player. You do a lot of stuff." He says, "But I have to tell you something. You're not going to get into any of these schools. And, you should be thinking about something else. And, you are a good basketball player, but you're really good with your hands. So you might want to be thinking about other stuff." And in our community, you all know Oakland and Topeka, very proud of having a very strong relationship with the railroad. And a lot of my uncles and my grandfather, great opportunities for us there. And so Mr. Rohr was kind of saying, "You might want to think about the railroad as well." And so I kind of ignored him because of all the envelopes. The story's not over yet. So I applied to all the schools, got into all of them, which was I was very fortunate. They all needed a short point guard. I actually played basketball. I was a college basketball player. Because when you grow up 30 miles from K, you know you're not. You played at Harvard. But, so I was very fortunate. I had a great experience at Harvard. I was very fortunate to win a Rhodes Scholarship, and I was at Oxford in England. Played basketball there too. Really. Tons of folks either Topeka Y, Oxford team. I'm not really sure. And so then I decided I was going to go to law school to be a lawyer. And so I came back. You can't make this stuff up. So I came back. Everyone has like a crazy uncle in their family. For me, it's my Uncle Rudy. It was Christmas time, and so I was going to get a Christmas gift from Uncle Rudy. Patron tequila. There's a certain tequila that he really likes. So I'm at the liquor store, and I'm got my bottle of tequila, and I go in to favorite tequila. I put the bottle of tequila down, and I look up. It's Mr. Rohr. He says to me, here you were in Oxford, that's fantastic. At Harvard, I told you you could always do this. And then he said to me, he said, so what are you thinking of doing next? I'm not making this up. I said, I'm thinking of going to law school. He said, where are you thinking of going? I said, I'm applying to Stanford, Berkeley, Harvard, and Yale. You know the punchline. And he says to me, that's fantastic, it's great, you've done incredible stuff. I don't think you're going to get into any of this. That'll be $28.99. So respect is an important piece. A long way to talk about respect. Empower. Guess question back here.
Turn up the mic.
Turn up the mic. Does that help? Should I get up closer? Okay, you're hearing the jokes, you're wondering what I'm saying? Okay, that's all right. I apologize. I will try to talk a little bit closer here. On the empower side, a big piece for us is making sure that we just give everyone a chance. Pretty basic stuff here, but really making sure one of the things we did both in 08 and 12 is we could care less how old you were, what you brought to the table, as long as you were willing to work, and as long as we could focus on results. So the empowering piece became really important for us around young folks, around people who understood technology, in the community, people who normally weren't involved in politics, but were the first time being asked just to get involved. But that empower side, and if anything, targeting non-political folks became a really important piece for us. People who had proven themselves as leaders in the community in other ways, at the church, in the neighborhood, but they had never been asked. And then on the inclusion side, just the idea of making sure that we found a way to go to scale. So crowdsourcing, you hear that all the time in terms of technology, this idea that more minds are better than fewer minds, but we now have the technology to do that in big, broad ways. That was another key piece for us on the campaign as well. How do we do it? Here are some of the things that helped for us. I'm just going to throw out a number of the ideas. We can talk about the details later, but I'm just going to give you some of the quick headlines of the things that worked for us. I heard Carlos talking about some of these things today in the Hispanic caucus meeting, so you guys did a great job hiring. He was doing a great job already. So the first point for us was around community organizing and community building, right? Simple idea that a lot of you have already done in your own political careers in your neighborhoods, but we were taking it to the presidential level, and people said, you can't do this. It costs too much money, it takes too much time, but it's a pretty simple idea. It's going straight to the neighborhoods. It's going door to door. It's having house parties. It's listening to the community. It's allowing them to develop the agenda. When I heard future Governor Davis talking, I wanted to laugh about how many times we heard him talking to people about common sense and naming the issues that are really important to them and talking about them in a way that matter to them. So that kind of community building is different. The community is not used to us as a party spending any time and paying attention to them, or if we do, it's at the last minute. And we're showing up at the last minute to tell them they need to vote for candidate A, B, or C, and you haven't been around at all. So you need to start earlier, you've got to put time and energy, and it's not just organizing, it's really community building, because the long term is really about not just getting their votes, but getting them to be active participants in the party. We were not smart enough to know this when we started in 07 and 08, but by the end of the 08 cycle, when we counted up the numbers, we are huge data folks with the Obama team, there were more than 1 million people that we had trained across the country who had never been involved in politics before. Let alone at the local level. So community building and community organizing is really important. Another piece that was really important to us was questioning everything, challenging all the assumptions. You showed, I was talking about how we started our meetings. What are the key assumptions? What are some of the undiscussables? And for a lot of our folks, because they hadn't been involved in politics, they get asked the most basic questions. Now, why do you guys spend all these times on these committees? What are they really doing? Now, why does it happen that way? Or how many, so few people that get to play our roles? So there were a lot of those things that, when I think about us here in Kansas, which we did in a number of other states, and the question that I would throw out to you that we've thrown out to other folks, if you had to start the Kansas Democratic Party tomorrow, start all over from scratch, what would it look like? What would it look like? Would it be the same things you're doing today, or would it be different? And if it does look different, then obviously the next question for us is, why aren't you doing that? So we stole a simple idea from the corporate sector. They have a little tool that they use that's called the 5 whys. And whenever you're talking about taking something on and trying to understand it, you ask why at least 5 times. Why do you have that particular approach? Tell me, blah, blah, blah. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? And it really helps you get to the essence. And as we started to do that with folks across the country, what we really found was that they pretty much got rid of a lot of what they used to do, because their answer was usually, well, because that's what we always do. And when we really started thinking about what was important and how do we get more folks elected and what's it going to take to get them involved, it just shifted in terms of how they did their business and how people said, I want to be a part of it. So questioning everything. Tied to that was really about doing business differently. I hate right now that I'm kind of almost doing the speech thing because it's like a lecture thing. We found out pretty quickly that people were tired of the lectures, right? That they had something to say, but we weren't setting up processes that really allowed them to do that. So once again, we went around and said, how do we do business differently? When I was working at the White House, and we really wanted to see what the Hispanic community was thinking about education, the typical thing was that the federal government either didn't go out, bless you, allergy season, the federal government either didn't go out to the communities, or if they did, they put up a mic, someone came up from him, right? Even Ronald Reagan used to joke about this, the words you were most afraid of. Hi, I'm Juan Sepulveda, I'm from the federal government, right? And I'm here to help you. So that's the worst thing you could do. So we pitched a different idea. What if we allowed the community to set the agenda at these meetings? And it took me about 6 months, and people were like, wait, well, you're a great guy, you really helped us, did I get you right? We're going to show up to these things, and you're telling me that's the agenda? What, are you crazy? We can't do that. But the whole idea was to get folks to be able to share their own ideas. It was called the open space process. I don't know, has anyone been in part of an open space process? 4, 5 hands, 6 hands? Most people haven't. So what we did was in one of my old houses, I had worked with the Rockefeller Foundation. We hired, with a number of foundations, a bunch of people to go look at this stuff. And we said, come back and tell us what are the most effective approaches. Is it when someone's lecturing? Is it when you have a panel? Is it with a PowerPoint? Is it question, how does it work? And they came back and they told us the same thing that all of you who've been to Kansas Democratic conventions and meetings, you know the answer to this. The answer was the most effective time was the coffee break. Because it was during the coffee break that I found you and had the conversation that we really wanted to have, or to talk about the things we really wanted to talk about. And so the open space process became a way of saying, how do you create a day-long coffee break, right? Where you have the conversations you want to have for as long as you want to have to get things done. That's one example, but there are a lot of other different ways of doing business that we've incorporated into the way we run the federal government and the way we were doing it on the campaign. But the power, here's a crazy idea, you're going to treat the folks as equals, right? So the old idea that a small group of people can get together and figure out what 100% of the people in the room need is wrong. So let go of it. Let go of it. Trust your folks. And what we found again and again was that the issues we would have brought up, they're bringing them up as well, but now they own them. And they usually brought them up with a slightly different twist. And then there were other issues that we could never have imagined that they were going to put onto the table, but they could own it. Bless you. They could own it, and they could take it on. So really thinking about how you do the work differently is really important. Crowdsourcing, I mentioned that earlier. We know now that you can go to scale. One of the things that's really important for us in this 2012 campaign was we built all of our software in-house. You hear about outsourcing, this was insourcing, right? We did it all in-house, but we put together some incredible software packages that allowed us to hand in hand with the knocking on the doors to be able to get information to folks and to go to another place at scale that we could have never done before, but we now can do with technology. Collecting information, finding out with people. And we would laugh because we would have couples who would call us up and they were like, "What are you doing?" Because my husband got this letter and I got this one. They were completely different. That's right. Because we knew that these were the issues that were most important to you. It's not one-to-one yet. That's the ultimate goal. But this is the closest thing you've seen to true micro-targeting. You hear that term all the time. Our ability to send you the pieces that matter most to you, hand in hand with the information you're giving us, to really kind of take it to scale. That's what we did with our team. One thing you always hear across the country is not having enough money to hire staff. And what we found that we were able to take volunteers through these conversations who were putting onto the agenda issues that were important to them and skills that they had. So we basically were able to double and triple the size of our teams through super volunteers who were really operating as staff. So not even seeing them as volunteers anymore, but saying, you know what, you are a communications expert, so help me run my DNC Hispanic media team. And so allowing people to once again bring their talents, but the idea of crowdsourcing, getting more people, is an easier thing today than ever before. Understanding the system is the next one that became really important for us. And here I think about David Plouffe. In 07 and 08, we knew that the first thing, the only chance that Senator Obama had of getting into being taken seriously was that we had to win one of the first 4 primaries. Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. And so as a reminder, every single day when you walked into the office in Chicago, you literally walked over 4 maps. Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. We knew exactly what it was about every single day. That was the only thing that mattered. And then obviously when we won in Iowa, it changed the game. But then the question was, what do we do now? And we just needed to know what the rules were. We had to understand the system. And I remember we have a guy who was in charge of our delegate selection process. And he's a well-known guy. He's from D.C. He's an attorney. And every 4 years he would get hired by a Democratic candidate. And he actually had sat out the last campaign because the same thing would happen every 4 years. They would hire him for his expertise and he would never get to use it because it didn't matter. Somebody would win early and then the game would be over and he'd have to go back to his law firm. And that was a waste of time again. He was the one who told us early on, you know what this is about? It's about the number of delegates you win. That's what this is about. Senator Obama can only win if he gets X number of delegates. So we were like, okay, it's all about winning delegates. And so our strategy, because we understood the system, we got the rules, was then to go after delegates. You saw what happened in the primaries, very close race back and forth, but in the end, when we got to Super Tuesday, I remember because I was back home in Kansas over at Highland Park, as we were doing a caucus here, even though we lost some big states then, we lost California, New York, which we knew we were going to, we won in places like Kansas, and we actually were ahead on the delegates because that's what mattered. So understanding the system becomes a really important piece of how you kind of do your work. David Plouffe used to say all the time, just tell me the rules and then we'll figure out the strategy. We've got to attack crazy stuff like Chris Kobach is doing with voter stuff, and we're going to attack it and we got to keep attacking it. We're doing that all across the country. But we also have to be, as we're attacking those things, whatever success we can have, but if we can't get it done, at some point, as we get ready for elections, we have to say, here's the new game. In a number of battleground states, voter ID got pushed a number of places. We were able to turn it, change it in some places, but in other places we couldn't. We reached a point where we said we got to stop with our legal strategy, and now we got to come in with a game on the ground with the Latino community. where we're going to get young folks to take their grandparents to go get their IDs. We weren't crazy about it, but at the end of the day, that's what we had to do. And one of the trickiest things that really surprised us was we knew how horrible this was for the community, but when we actually polled it, the African American community and the Hispanic community higher than the white community and the Anglo community in support of voter ID. At higher percentages. We were shocked. And then we asked, why? Why would you be in favor of this? And we got the same response. I'm okay with doing this because if I do that, there's absolutely no way they can mess with my vote. They were so afraid of what they were going to do that even this horrible thing about voter ID to them sounded okay because there's no way they're going to mess with my vote. We helped them to understand there are better ways. Let's think about this. Let's expand things. But at the end of the day, in some states, that's the game we had to play, but we still beat them at it. Because at some point, you just got to play by the rules. Power mapping is one of the last few things I wanted to mention. The Hispanic community in Kansas, like in other states, is not one. I was telling folks at the Hispanic Caucus earlier, there is no such thing as the Hispanic vote. We're really honest about it. There's a Mexican-American vote. There's a Puerto Rican vote. There's a Cuban vote. There's a Dominican vote, fill in the blank. You can't treat it all the same. And in Kansas, we can't even do that either because it's not 100% all the same. And even though the majority of the Hispanics in Kansas are Mexican in background, even for us, there are differences in those of us who've been here for a long time and those of us who just got here recently. I feel like I'm picking on my Uncle Rudy, but I was telling folks in the Hispanic Caucus earlier, when I was just in Topeka the last few days, saw Uncle Rudy. I said, hey, Uncle Rudy, how's everything going? He says, yeah, you know, things are going well, things are going well. Except for those damn Mexicans. And I was like, aren't we Mexican? And what he was talking about were the latest set of immigrants to be here. So that even within the community, my family coming over after the Mexican Revolution and being here, Our Lady of Guadalupe just had our 80th anniversary of our fiesta, right? These are folks who've been here for a long time. And if I'm really going to be honest, most of them don't really speak Spanish anymore. It's primarily English. The new set of folks who are coming in, whose dominant language is Spanish, and just coming from a very different background. So even in Kansas, and then we can talk about the differences between the urban areas and what's happening in the meatpacking plants in western Kansas. So we just have to be smart about power mapping our own community and not treating it as all the same. And even the language question. There are going to be times when Spanish makes sense. There's going to be times when English makes sense. And the English is going to need to have a little twist for the Hispanic community. But we just have to be smart about the power mapping side. The final one I want to talk about tonight and see if folks have any questions or reactions is around technology and data. We're big numbers, folks. And probably one of the biggest lessons that we learned in 2008 and in 12, which our political consultant friends are not too crazy about, is that we found out that yes, you still need your political consultants. We've got great wisdom and experience and we got to build on that. But what we found out was checking the intuition that a lot of us had as senior staff, along with our fellow political consultants, was wrong a lot of the time up against the data. So we used to be